What's good, beautiful people? Colin Devane here from Grow Your Own Productions. Today, I want to talk about propagating plants from cuttings. What does that mean? Propagating just means making more plants. From cuttings means from pieces of an existing plant. So say you have a tree that you really like, you love the fruit on that tree, you can take a branch from that tree. Sometimes from certain plants you can take roots, you can take from cactuses like a top section of the cactus, and you can make a whole another version of that plant. Why would you want to do this? Good question. Essentially, two reasons that I can think of. So one, plants produce seeds during a certain time of the year, and they produce a certain amount of seeds, and they disperse those to the wind, to the birds, to the ground, whatever, and those seeds go away. You don't always have seeds. You pretty much, in most plants, always have branches. You pretty much always have roots. You pretty much always have those basic structures. So if you, in the absence of seeds, you have the ability to make more plants, and that makes you a more versatile grower. That makes you more able to create more plants because it is a numbers game. You never know what you're going to get from any of these cuttings, from these seeds, in terms of success rates, right? You do know what you're going to get, however, from a fully cloned plant. So the second reason is essentially that these are direct copies, genetic copies of the parent plant. Say grandma has a mango tree and you love her mangoes, they're the best, you want to grow your own. You take one of her delicious mangoes, you eat it, you scrub off the flesh, you open up that seed, you soak it, you propagate it, you grow a tree. 5 years later, you get some more mangoes from that seed, and what the fuck? These are not grandma's mangoes. I did not invest 5 years of my life for this. What the hell's going on? That mango had a deadbeat dad. You never know. You got genetic material coming in from all angles. It's mixing, right? It could be it could be better than grandma's mangoes. You could have just invented the next best mango in the world, right? You just never know. Point being, seeds are the products of sexual reproduction. So you have two parent plants, they're goodies smacking together, making a new baby who knows what it's going to be like. When you take a cutting, you are just literally cloning that exact plant's parent material, and you should get, if you graft it onto another tree or you get it to grow roots and you plant it, you should get an identical copy. If the environmental factors stay the same, you should get that same phenotypic expression. So those are the two reasons, main reasons why I think people propagate. It's also fun, it's interesting, it's cool, it's different. I want to have as many options in my arsenal of possibilities to grow as many plants as my heart desires. So hopefully that's reason enough for you. Stick around to the end and I'll talk about how to propagate succulents. This video, however, is specifically on elderberries. I did one recent on elderberries, but it wasn't quite as detailed as today's. Today's I get a lot more in depth into how to get things to root. Say you don't have store-bought rooting hormone, how do you still encourage root growth in your cuttings? One disclaimer, elderberries are a poisonous berry, right? They have a cyanide precursor like a lot of different things. Yucca has it, or yucca, the Brazilian kind that makes tapioca, apple seeds. There's a lot of different things that have cyanide precursors in them, and you obviously want to be cautious about those alkaloids. Cooking gets rid of them. That's why you cook the berries to make the syrup, etc. So wanted to let y'all know that. Just be real aware of what you're eating at all times. Don't just go eating random shit, of course. What's going on, good people? Most of y'all probably know, obviously, plants come from seeds, right? Yes, they also can come from branches. So you can take a branch from another plant and turn it into basically a copy, a clone of that same plant. I'm gonna show you how I'm learning how to do this. So I went in Southern California here, we have wild elderberries growing in the hills. They're medicinal berries, super nutritious. A lot of people as moms are forcing them to take them right now because they help boost your immunity when you're fighting off a cold or something like that. So they're really cool plants to learn how to propagate. And I wanted to figure out how to make more of these. They grow without human help, so grabbed a couple. And I just want to show you what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a good branch to turn into another plant. The first thing I want to see is this branch alive, right? So these elderberries have been out there producing new branches every year. And at some point, those older branches that have been maybe there for 4 or 5 years, they're basically dead wood. They're not really, there's no life left in them. You can kind of see that by the color. They'll be darker gray than this. You can see this has some like reddish, brownish tint to it. The dead wood is going to be just like this really dark gray, but all around. Also, when you cut it on the inside, I just cut this one fresh, you can see it's got that greenish hue to it. That lets me know there's still life in there. There's still stuff pulsating. There's still, it's still wet. There's still, you know, cells moving and growing and stuff. So we want a living, younger branch. So that means something probably of this season's growth or last season's growth. They are deciduous, so they lost all their leaves, but you could still spot, there's a couple leaves on some of these, but you can still spot them, like I said, by the color and where they are on the plant. They're going to be towards the growing edge of the plant. So I grabbed these from the tips of a really large elderberry, almost patch. It was like growing out of a fallen log. It looked like it had died and regrown a couple times. So tough. We know that this stuff can continue and regrow. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what I would do. I would look for along the branch. They say you want about a pencil width, so I think this area would probably be better, but I'm going to work with what I got. They were thick branches. But you look for these nodes, and you see how these nodes are where leaves or other stems will grow out of, right? And at each one of these nodes, they're essentially places of growth, right? There's a lot of, the concentrated growth hormone, from what I understand, is in those areas. So we want to use that to our advantage when we want to grow roots. They're not just plants like us have stem cells, and they can go in different directions. They can grow roots, they can grow buds, depending on what they're asked to do by their environment. So we want to have one of these nodal areas. We want to cut, I hear, sort of right below one of these nodes, and then we want to scrape the area to expose. You can see how nice and green this area that I'm scraping is, to expose space for the roots to puncture through the bark. So now we've got a nice exposed bottom. We don't need this much. This is really long. We don't need to grow something this big. It would be cumbersome anyway. So I'm gonna have, let's say, 3 nodes in this one, right? We'll keep it about a foot long. I hear anywhere between 6 inches and a foot is ideal length. All right, so we've got our cutting. I can just do a few things with this. I can just stick it straight in the ground and pray, water it ideally. That you're a little bit susceptible to root rot because it's kind of just sitting in there. It depends on the soil. So here in Huntington Beach, there's some really clay-based soil. I tried these with that method. I've got a few out front, and this stuff is really, it'll hold moisture, but it might hold a little too much moisture. Another method is to stick it in just straight in water, or in water with a little bit of rooting hormone, and that also could be cool, but it also could lead to root rot, to just too much water, to molding and stuff like that. So the medium, or the way to do this that kind of keeps them moist but not too moist, from what I hear, is to use like a sandy soil mix or perlite. So right here, this is just a little bit of basic potting soil and sand. You can get sand from the beach, riverbed, wherever. But that sand is porous and will allow some of the water to drain out, so that your baby roots aren't just sitting there with wet feet all the time. We don't like wet feet. Plants don't like wet feet either. So let's say I just did some right here. Let me show you the whole process that I'm going to go through. You don't need to put multiple per pot. I might try that just because I didn't have that many pots. But I'll take, let's just say, equal parts sand and amendment, and I'll fill up a thing here. There's a lot of amendment. I'll stir it up a little bit. And now I've got a loose sandy potting soil that should drain well. Make sure you have holes in the bottom of your pot. If you're using, you can just use like red cups, you know, those red party cups. Just make sure you poke holes in the bottom so it can drain out, and then have this loose soil. And now, do I just stick it straight in the ground? I could, but what I want to try to do is actually encourage root development. So I'm going to use some natural remedies that I've heard encourage root development. You can buy rooting hormone at the store. That's probably your best bet, but I wanted us to have options to do this even if we don't have the money or time or access to rooting hormone. There's other ways to try it. So I'm gonna, like I said, this is an experiment. I've got stuff in water over there. I've got stuff straight in the soil out there. I've got stuff in this soil that I dipped in my little rooting hormone stimulant mix. But this, I hope, is gonna be the best way. Rooting stimulant and in a nice, well-drained soil. You also want to keep this as moist as possible. So I've seen people like wrap saran wrap around it, or put it in like put like a 2-liter bottle upside down over it, or just any way that you can think to keep this thing moist but not too moist is really going to help. What is this rooting hormone stuff that I just did? Basically, you can use a lot of different things. One of the main things that I've seen is willow. So if you live in an area that has willows, we do, they're planted in like grocery stores around here. If anyone wants help finding some willows, I could probably help get you some, or tell you how to look for them. But willow bark is actually what they made aspirin out of. The native people used to use like to chew the inner bark of the willow, I think, because it has a compound in it, a couple compounds that help relieve pain. One of the compounds that it has in it that is relevant here is salicylic acid, which y'all probably will know from your acne medications. I'm not sure exactly what the mechanism is, but I understand salicylic acid is present in crushed up willow leaves, bark, branches, growing tips, and you can extract it by just crushing those up, smashing them down, and soaking them in water. So I did this a couple days ago, and it's just been soaking and gathering up all that salicylic goodness. I mixed it, you can tell the color, not just with the willow water, but also a little bit of saliva. I hear it's a magical ingredient. I don't know why it works, but apparently it does. A little bit of molasses, which I'm not sure what the mechanism exactly, but I think it might help feed soil bacteria in the area, which could stimulate it or something. And then from what I hear, honey helps kind of protect the roots. It gives it a little bit of antiseptic power, protect the rooting area from rot. So I did that mix. There's other things you can include. If you don't have willow, you can just use aspirin. You can just straight up aspirin, I think works kind of like willow. But yeah, so I'm gonna just soak this for a little bit, and then I'm trying them at different lengths as well. You can see just different like numbers of root nodes, or of nodes per stem. We'll see what works best. I'll let you know if any of this mumbo gumbo witchery works. But so yeah, so you take it, dip it in your rooting hormone. I'd probably want to soak it a little bit longer in this, stir it up, and then what you want to do is take your pot and don't just jam it in, especially if you're using actual rooting hormone. Don't just jam the thing straight in. All your rooting hormone just got to the top of the soil, and it didn't stay down in there with it. We want it to stay down there with it. So instead, what you do is just poke a hole with your finger, prepare it, get it in there, make it bigger than it, and then backfill it around it. So I'm gonna actually put this one in a bigger pot because it's taller, but poke a nice hole, jam it in there, keep it wet as much as you can, and in a month, 2 months depending, some of these will probably grow roots. Hopefully, if I did this process right, some of these will grow roots. You have to have patience, and it's a numbers game. You have to do multiple of these. You're not gonna, just like when you plant seeds, they don't all come up. So keep it moist. The way you can tell if it's rooted is if you give it a little tug and it doesn't really budge, doesn't move out of there, that you can tell it's got some roots. The sand actually helps, kind of, in addition to drainage, it gives the roots room to work. So if your mixture is really loose, you might just yank it up and, oh, there are roots, but it came out real easy. That's fine. You can usually rinse those off and then plant them. But the better way to tell, it's not foolproof, is if after a few months you start to get a little bit of growth. So if you start to see new growth on it, not immediately. If it's immediately growing, just cut those off, because you don't want the plant shedding water. There's a little bit of like evapotranspiration that happens when you have leaves on a thing. They're permeable, they lose water. So cut any leaves off. Like I said, if you want to use saran wrap, seal these tips, or seal it any way that you can keep this kind of moist and warm. That's just a good nursery environment. All life, pretty much young life especially, likes moist, warm environments to grow in. So there you have it. There's my elderberry cutting experiment. I'm gonna let y'all know which ones work, which ones come up and don't. If you want to try this yourself, if you'd like, I will either tell you where to get elderberry cuttings, or I will bring you some. If you're really stoked on this and you really want to get it started, let me know. I'd be happy to help, and help you get some willow as well. If you want to make your own willow water, it's probably like way easier to just buy rooting hormone, but you can do it the natural, stubborn way like me if you want. So yeah, I'll let you know how this goes, this little elderberry propagation experiment. Alright, as promised, here is how to propagate succulents. Very similar process. Take a cutting, so this one's from a dragon fruit, And dragon fruits have these little nodes. You'll see these kind of like individual segments and a node, right? So I cut this one off right at the node. In order to get it to root, it's a little bit better to have a little bit more surface area from which the roots can grow. So I'm gonna cut maybe a centimeter or two, half an inch off the bottom, and then I'm gonna let this dry out in the sun for like 3 days, right? You wanna keep it out somewhere where it's gonna actually dry out so it can callus over, and that callus is gonna prevent stuff from crawling up in there or getting any kind of infection when we plant it. It also, like I said, gives more surface area for the roots to grow from. So this is a dragon fruit. Same thing would go for a nopal. This is an old beat up nopal that I just found. I gave it a good clean cut at the bottom. That is a fruiting nopal. This is more for just the pads. This doesn't really have edible fruit, but the pads are kind of spineless. So it's another type of nopal. We do the same thing on this one. Here's a Peruvian apple cactus. I just did a fresh cut on this as well. Let it dry out, stick it in the ground, wait a month or two, water it heavy at the beginning, and then with these succulents especially, here's an aloe vera. Found this one already dried out. Might give it a fresh cut. But with the succulents, give it a good water up front. Make sure it's loose soil if you can, and then kind of let it drain out and let it stay dry, as progressively drier as the month or two goes on. And a month or two later, you should have a fully rooted cactus. You can just give it a little tug, and if it doesn't really budge too much, then you know it's stuck in there good and rooted. You can also, if you're going to repot it, just take it out of its pot and shuffle off all the dirt. Make sure that you got roots, and then plant it wherever you want it. Cool. That is how to propagate stuff. Y'all get out there, get growing, get planting. Rock on.